Psychology is all around us. Psychological elements can be seen throughout the lifespan, from birth until death. Films are a wonderful tool to explain psychological theory and occurrences in our lives. Characters interact within each frame of film psychological concepts. The films we remember most and view multiple times engage us by capturing the presence of these psychological dynamics in an authentic way. Join me today, Dr. Katherine Marshall Woods, licensed clinical psychologist and film consultant, and my guest, Chase Parker, discussing the film Welcome to Afrotree on the best psychology of film. Welcome, everyone, to Best Psychology in Film. My name is Dr. Marshall Woods, your host, and today I have the pleasure of introducing our guest today, which is Chase Parker, speaking about his film Welcome to Afrotree. Welcome, Chase. How are you today?
I'm good. It's a nice Thursday afternoon. It's sunny. These times are always weird because in New York, or at least like the East Coast, like one day it's like 90 degrees. Then the next day it's like 30 degrees. So it's always a weird time in the fall. But I love the fall because I was actually born in the fall. So
you are certainly a fall advocate.
yes,
a lot of transitions and a lot of temperature regulations that you have to be able to know how to dress accordingly for.
very true.
But hopefully a beautiful time for people enjoying the autumn.
Yes.
Well, speaking about beautiful time in autumn, Afrotree, meaning a lot of the trees that people were receiving in your film. Today we are speaking about Welcome to Afrotree. Can you tell us a little bit about your film?
Of course I can. So Welcome to Afrotree is about a Black couple who are from New York City, or really just a big city in general. And they are basically fed up with racism. They're fed up with having to constantly code switch, especially when they're in the corporate race. They're tired of the constant whitewashing and gentrification. If you've grown up in a major city, you've pretty much had that experience of having a city kind of be one way when you were born, and now it's, a little bit more upscale and a little bit more expensive. So anybody who has lived in a major city kind of has that experience of gentrification. So you have this couple who are essentially fed up with all of that. So they hear about this gated community called Afrotree, in which all the residents are Black. And they decide to move there. And when they move there, they soon find out that they may not be Black enough for this community.
Why don't we give our audience an opportunity to have a little sneak peek, and then we'll return to speak with Chase more about the film.
Sure.
It's a cultural oasis, a place you'll be proud to live in and raise your family. It's a manifestation of all your dreams, and it's all just a signature away. Welcome to Afrotree.
Well, this film is extraordinarily entertaining for many reasons. And I think, an individual of color, of any ethnicity, potentially could relate to this film. Being able to think about where they are in their lives, where they're positioned career-wise, financially-wise, and trying to connect with people who they feel an allegiance to, an alliance to, and who feel like they could be understood with. And I'm wondering, you said earlier, that most people who are from major cities or can relate to this. Why did you feel like this story was important to be shared with our community?
I feel like it's important because there are so many Black people who feel although they are Black by skin color, they don't feel Black by culture. I can remember, I'm from New York. Like, I grew up in an inner city. Like, I grew up primarily around all Black people. I went to high school. There was literally nothing but Black and Hispanic. I think we only had like three white people, and coincidentally, they were all related. So that was a weird experience. But it wasn't until I went to college where it just blew my mind, about the different experiences of being Black. I seen Black people who grew up in suburban neighborhoods where they had both parents in the home, and they you're from the DC area, you're in the DC area, so Chocolate City, your doctor's Black, your dentist is Black, you got a Black grocery store up the block. And for me, like, I never had that experience growing up. So to go when I got to college and seeing kids who grew up with a different experience than me, it was kind of a culture shock. And these are Black kids, like, these are same skin color as me. And there was always like this battle between Black kids who were from like the inner city versus Black kids who were from like suburban areas about who is actually considered Black. And I think this notion of like having to have some sort of struggle, in a sense, is definitive of your Blackness. And I always wanted to combat that. So that's kind of what was really the biggest inspiration of Welcome to Afrotree. And then, you look at the news, and then you look at the media, and they're always talking about the Black community, as if we're all like just bunched up in this one little area. And I don't know, I kind of decided to play on that a bit with creating an actual Black community with this film. So it's kind of the inspirations of it.
Yes. Well, it's certainly a lot to draw from, because you're saying, in part, you experienced some of this personally, and individuals within, let's say, the Black community can sometimes go to a different community and have to justify whether they are Black, like you say, in culture, and experience. And sometimes a person is deemed not Black enough. Sometimes they're considered too Black in the communities and so you're really thinking about the fact that as a African American community, we are not homogenous. There's a lot of diversity amongst us all. And how is it that we reconcile that? And I wonder if you're also, in the film, it kind of gives me the indication that you're saying, and that's okay, that we are different.
Yeah, it's a weird thing to look at, because I think, with us being Black, I think we aren't, we aren't a monolith. I think, we do have different cultures, different thought processes, things of that nature within our own. There's so many subcultures within the Black culture, but at the same time, I do feel like there are times where we need to come together and kind of have a one band, one sound kind of mentality. So, it's that fight. I think as a Black person, it's kind of that fight. It's like, I want to be my own individual. I want to have my own thought process, but at the same time, I do want to stay true to the culture. I want to stay true to my Blackness. So, you're kind of fighting. It's kind of like a tug of war in a sense. Sometimes, at least for me personally, it's like I want to be my own individual. I want to do my own thing. But at the same time, I do believe that there are moments where we do need to have like a one band, one sound of kind of mentality, more of a communal mentality in a sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, we definitely see this within the film, is that individuals that are coming to Afrotree are desiring to have that communal experience, and that there is a transition that comes with that. It seems like that's not always so easy to do.
Very true. Very true. With someone like Janet, who Charlie Q, who plays Janet in this film, that's really her struggle. It's, I want to connect with my own people, but making that transition so quickly isn't exactly, comfortable for me to do, because I'm so accustomed to, having to code switch and having to be around, a diverse group of people. So it's a bit of that struggle. And then you have Amani's character, who's played by Trey Lynn, who is more so, this is the standard of this community, and this is the standard that you have to abide by if you want to live here. And if you don't want to abide by that standard, or if you don't get on par within a timely manner, then we must take action.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because that idea of we must take action in order to help you get there. Do you feel like, at some level, the film has a sci-fi experience to this. Do you feel like there are opportunities where that can happen for people, where they are able to be in a community that helps them make some transitions to get closer to their community?
I think so. I think we again, it starts with just the Black community as a whole, developing a communal mindset. I think if we had more of a communal mindset, it wouldn't be anything to go support a Black business. You know what I mean? It wouldn't be nothing to say, you know what, I'm a Black barber, I'm gonna buy all of my material from this Black owned store, from that Black owned store, that store owner, I'm going to get all of my material from the Black farm, things of that nature. Once we develop that communal mindset, I think a lot of things kind of fall in place from there. But it really starts with us having that mindset, having that family mindset, understanding that in order for us to, you look at the Black dollar, they say it takes like 7 minutes or something like that for it to circulate throughout the entire community, where there are other races and other cultures, it takes days, even weeks for it to circulate. And that's because one person says, I'm going to buy from this grocery store that is owned by someone who looks like me. That grocery store owner says, I'm going to go to this farm, who's somebody who looks like me, and purchase from there. And then that dollar circulates until it's time to leave. And I think we need to develop that. It's like the second we make some money, it's like I'm going to go to the European clothing line, I'm going to go to the other grocery store and support them. But if we can support our own, then I think things will kind of fall in place. So again, it goes back to having that communal mindset and just developing that communal mindset, supporting Black businesses, supporting Black doctors, lawyers, things of that nature, politicians. Once we have that communal mindset, then, like I said, things will kind of fall in place.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like, Janet, who is the lead here, or the co-lead, has the opportunity to have a partner that is encouraging her to, like, let's stick this through, let's see what happens. And generally they're both coming into it in a similar place, that they've lived this life together, we're assuming, and they are within the same sort of corporate worlds, living in the same household, which then means living in the same city, and having like their own culture of themselves being a marital partnership. Mm-hmm. And another individual, he's saying, let's stick it through, let's see what happens. And she's really having much more of a difficult time being able to adjust. And I wonder if that is something that we see frequently, of individuals getting into another culture of African American people and saying, I don't know if I can relate to the same people who, again, like you said, look like me, but we're very different in that capacity. And having, let's say, an encouraging voice to say, let's stick it through, let's see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look at the experience. I went to a predominantly white school, but look at the experience of Black kids who went to an HBCU. And the reason why they went to an HBCU is because they wanted to be around people who look like them. They wanted to be around their own culture. Maybe they grew up in a neighborhood where they went to a private school and they were amongst the minority of Black kids that were there. So they said, you know what, when I go to college, I'm going to a HBCU. And then they get to an HBCU, maybe they try to join like a fraternity, a sorority, and they kind of turn their backs on them. Like, yeah, you're Black, but you're not like our kind of Black. You're more the like whitewash version, for lack of a better phrase, of Blackness. And that's not necessarily what we kind of connect with. So, I think if you look at any kid that's gone to HBCUs who've had that experience, they'll tell you, it's a hard adjustment. And you want to stick it out because you want to see it all the way through. But it takes a lot of adjusting, especially when you've been so accustomed to your life being one way. To make that complete shift takes a while. And I think with Steven's character, who was played by Wilson, I think he was just more motivated to stick it out because he wanted to see it through the end, whereas Janet was a little bit more hesitant because she had become so accustomed to the lifestyle that she had prior to coming to Afrotree. So even though she was willing to get into Afrotree and leave the life that she had before, there was still like a foot in the door of like, this is what I'm so used to. And for me to make that complete shift so quick, I'm not sure if I could do that. So.
Well, when we come back, I'd like us to talk a little bit about that adjustment, because that is certainly, psychologically speaking, can be really challenging for people to be able to cope with. So when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about adjusting with transitions with Mr. Chase Parker with his film, Welcome to Afrotree.
I do love what I do for a living. I never dreamed that having this career was possible until I came to UDC. I met a professor when I decided to finish up my degree program. She told me, hey, why don't you go and intern on Capitol Hill? The internship led to being a staffer. I would have never been opened up to that opportunity if that professor would have never urged me and said, I see something in you. My UDC experience changed my life. UDC helped me find my possible.
Find your possible. Visit udc.edu/possible to learn more.
Welcome back. Today we're here with Mr. Chase Parker discussing his film, Welcome to Afrotree. Before we left for break, we were talking about how individuals may really struggle to make adjustments when they've experienced a transition, even when it's in a community of individuals who look like them, and we feel like we can align with, that there may be some diversity and some differences that make it hard to be able to connect. And thank you so much for coming to talk about your film, Chase.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
One of the things that I wanted to share is, the challenges with adjusting to transitions. And I think that is really important to highlight that, that's a global idea. Every transition, every adjustment a person makes, they could really struggle at times to be able to make themselves become comfortable within the situation. And when it becomes so challenging for them, like if they start to experience symptoms of anxiety and depression, which can happen during a transition, we begin to think, is there an adjustment disorder that's present? Now, granted, if it's an adjustment disorder, we're anticipating that it's a short-lived experience. Maybe they may have a difficult time for a couple of months. And then once they get into the groove of things or be able to understand the culture, then we expect those symptoms to subside. But if it's longer, then we consider whether or not there's another diagnosis to consider. We see within your characters that they adjust. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, they kind of adjust by default of it's not a willing full adjustment. It's a bit more forced upon them. But with their characters, it all goes back to when you're making these transitions, you have to ask yourself, where are you now and where do you want to be? And what happens sometimes is that when people are reflecting on where they are now, you have to ask yourself, okay, well, what am I accustomed to? The things that I'm accustomed to. And if I can kind of sidestep from Afrotree, I just turned 34 this year, so I am still trying to conceptualize this idea of transitioning into manhood, like I'm seeing someone and talking about marriage and having kids, and that's not what I'm accustomed to, because I'm accustomed to being on my own, having my own place, being able to go wherever I want, and now having to transition into being able to share space with somebody. That's a very uncomfortable transition for me, because that's not what I'm accustomed to. um in the case of Janet and Stephen, what they're accustomed to, even though they didn't necessarily enjoy it after a while, that's what they're accustomed to. And then making that transition, I try to do it in steps, and this film is actually a proof of concept for a much longer film. And in the longer version, the transition period is a little bit slower. The reason why the film is so short, and it's a short film, so we try to condense everything into the film. So that's why the transition seems faster. But in the feature, the transition is a little bit slower. But going back to making that adjustment, it's a very difficult process. I think it's a slow process, but I think for me at least, I try to do it in pieces. Okay, this is kind of, again, sidestepping. I have a tendency to sidestep, so forgive me. Kind of sidestepping back to my manhood. I do it in pieces. Okay, so this year I want to work on being able to be a little bit more financially responsible. Okay, maybe next month, or as I move forward, I want to learn how to share space with somebody. I want to learn how to be a little bit more considerate of others. So for me, it's a little bit more of a slower process, so that I don't feel so overwhelmed with the transition. And I think that's kind of the issue with Janet and Stephen, well, particularly Janet's character, is that the transition was so quick. It's like one day you're complaining about being amongst too much diversity, and now it's like next day you're in Afrotree, it's everybody who looks like you. So to try to make that transition so quick, it could become a little bit overwhelming. But had she done it a little bit slower, the adjustment period would have been much smoother.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Right, because there are so many opportunities that this couple is posed with quite quickly, like you mentioned. They're invited to a social event, and within that time and space, they're introduced to purchasing Black and talking about specific cultural aspects, and everything around them is really centered around our culture in specific ways. It seems quite dissimilar to how we meet both Janet and Stephen, who is having dinner with friends who are not of color. Well, I'm sorry, potentially of color. And this is once you see the film, this will too be funny, hopefully, is that they're surrounded with their friends who are not necessarily able to share in the same cultural experiences as they are. And so even just in their downtime, not just work time, their lives was pretty consumed with not necessarily being around people who they could identify with. So it does seem so stark. And then only to come to Afrotree and really experience that the reality is they're really struggling to identify with the people they think they should be identifying with. What now to do?
Exactly. It's like the old saying, too Black for the white people, but not Black enough for the Black people. That's kind of where it all started. You go through life doing so much to try to qualify yourself or qualify your Blackness, only to transition into people who are amongst you and then you're still trying to qualify your Blackness. You know what I mean? In a sense. So that's it's a rough transition, and you know, Stephen and Janet, um, had they had a little bit more time to adjust, then I think what you have experienced in the latter end of the film probably wouldn't have happened.
Mm-hmm. You feel that given an individual's motivation to see things through, that where people might land is actually in a place of accepting and in a place of being able to connect after all.
Definitely, definitely, definitely.
So that is a very hopeful ending, shall we say.
Very hopeful.
Well, let me ask you this. I think that, Janet and Stephen, and I'm glad that you say that there's a potential for a feature for this, because I would be interested to see what would be next for them. Do you have specific ideas or fantasies as to what will happen to them?
um I don't want to give it away too much, but the ending is kind of similar to the ending in the short film in a sense. But I think what's more important is the conversations that come from the feature. You know, we talk about Blackness, we talk about colorism, we talk about hair. Hair is a very big conversation within this film, the feature version of it. So those are some of the conversations that are going to come out of the not trying to give too much away of the feature, but those are some of the themes that are um, in the feature film.
One question that I have, and I actually ask most filmmakers, is do you believe that film has the ability to heal? And if so, how does Afrotree help with that?
Um, I do think there is a healing aspect of film. I think the reason being is because there is a certain relatability that one may have with the character. You know, you look at a show like Insecure, how many Black women have that experience of going through life as a young woman, trying to manage their love life while also trying to manage like their career and their friendships, so many aspects of their life, and watching things fall apart and trying to pick up the pieces on one end, but like seeing the pieces on the other side fall off. So you're trying to stretch over there to fix that. You know, with this film, I we've been fortunate enough to be in a ton of film festivals this past summer, and one of the things, it's so interesting because you would think that, and a lot of these film festivals are Black film festivals as well. You would think that people would come up and be like, hey, like Amani's character, like I'm so down with her. Like I understand it. Like we gotta be Black all the way. Like you gotta transition to Blackness. But it was the complete opposite. So many people came up to me and was like, I feel like Janet. I feel like Stephen. I've always had an issue with like connecting with my culture. So that relatability, it showed, and it's like, you know, imagine being in an auditorium and one person gets up and says, you know, they're asking you a question in the Q&A, and they're saying, hey, look, you know, I've had that experience of being a Janet where I didn't feel connected to my own culture. And then like everybody's looking like, oh my God, like you too? Like I didn't think, you know, they didn't understand. They didn't see it as a thing until they saw it on screen. And it was like, okay, this is, you know, something that people have gone through. This is something that I can relate to. And then the conversation starts from there. You know, how can I sort of transition from feeling like I'm not Black enough to sort of like being able to embrace my individuality, but also embracing my Blackness. Afrotree does bring a lot of healing because it brings a lot of relatability, and it brings to the forefront of like, okay, I'm not the only person going through this. And now I know some of the steps I can take to move forward in my healing journey.
Please go visit this film. It is certainly going to be one that's not just entertaining, but also hopefully will spark a good deal of conversation with others in your life, or even just with thinking about what you feel yourself. So thank you so much for sharing this.
Thank you for having me. Once again, thank you so much for having me.
We will see you next time on Best Psychology in Film. If you'd like to get in contact with me, you can find me on Instagram at PsychMindedMedia. We'll see you next time.